humanity.
Hello, welcome to Parrot TV's Literary Corner. I'm Dustin Pickering, your noble and honest host on some days, and this is definitely one of those days. Today we have Lynn Marshall Brummels, who grew up at the edge of Nebraska sandhills. Brummels earned a psychology BA from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln and an MS in rehabilitation counseling from Syracuse University. After retiring from a counseling career at Wayne State College in Wayne, Nebraska, Brummel started a private counseling practice where she works as a Nebraska licensed mental health counselor. She's published poems in journals, magazines, and anthologies. She served as a Poetry Out Loud judge at the Northeast Nebraska Regional Semifinals of Poetry Out Loud for several years and online in 2020. Her poetry chapbooks are Cottonwood Strong and Hard Times, a 2016 Nebraska Book Award winner. Her book of poems, A Quilted Landscape, was published in 2021. We're glad to have you today, Lynn. Thanks for joining us on the program. How is your day going?
My day's going great, and thank you for inviting me. This is it'll be fun to do.
Excellent. Yes, it's very fun to do. It'll be an excellent interview. We'll enjoy ourselves, and we'll talk a lot about your work in poetry. And one of my first questions. You're from Nebraska, so does the location you're in, does it factor its way into your work? Do you write a lot of poems about the Nebraska landscape, for instance? And why do you choose to write about Nebraska?
Well, Nebraska has a rich tradition of poetry. There are a lot of people that have hailed from here that were famous writers and continue to write. You may be familiar with Ted Kooser.
Yes.
He's a Nebraskan and wrote, I think, in most of his life here and is still writing. But there are many people like him, maybe not quite as famous as Ted, but who have been teachers and mentors in Nebraska. And so it has a real rich history of poetry. I write about the landscape because when you live in rural Nebraska, sometimes the landscape is pretty impactful. I write about animals, my family, and then just some other thoughts.
Right. So how is the landscape? How does it relate to your poetry? I mean, how would you describe the landscape of Nebraska where you're at?
I'm up in the northeast corner right now, and it is a lot of farmland mostly. And the county that I live in particularly, and this is, I've been writing about this a lot lately, doesn't have any zoning regulations. And so we have now 3 wind farms in this county. And so there's one going up right across the road from me. And so that's what I mean by the landscape can have a dramatic impact on a person.
Right. So no zoning laws. So there's just a lot of space
they're just everywhere.
Kind of pastoral, sort of a pastoral atmosphere, would you say?
It certainly was.
Interesting.
Yeah. So we'll see how this all turns out once they're all up and running. But
do you include a lot of animals in your work? I mean, since there's a kind of like an open area, I would assume there's like a lot of wildlife.
There's wildlife. I also board horses here, so I've got a lot of horse things in my poetry. And then there's various pets, et cetera, et cetera. But there is quite a lot of wildlife around here.
Excellent. And so also you're a licensed mental health professional. I'm curious, do those subjects work their way into your poetry as well, or is that a separate life?
No, it actually coincides very nicely. My sort of theory of counseling is to use the arts in counseling because that's one of the best ways, I think, for people to pursue recovery if they can do so in a creative way.
Right. I'm reading Anthony Storr right now, his book Solitude, and he talks a lot about the various afflictions that a lot of really creative geniuses have suffered, everything from bereavement to depression. He talks about Kafka quite a bit in his work. And I think definitely the arts are quite a conduit for a person trying to struggle to develop meaning in their lives, and trying to sort of construct a reality in a way that, number one, is rich with their own desires of how they want things to be, and two, it helps deal with these conflicts and kind of restructure your and help develop your understanding of what's going on around you. I think that's definitely true. So how do you address those topics in your own work?
Well, interestingly enough, I read today an article of how the arts were used historically, and following World War One, to help some soldiers recover from the horrors of war. In Britain, they got a bunch of people, veterans, involved in embroidery and sewing, and
Mm-hmm.
as a way to help them recover from shell shock, I think they called it then, where you might call it PTSD today. And so the sort of the brain chemistry that goes with that is that you can, by using arts in kind of mental repair, it's a way of recircuiting your brain. So it's, I found that article very interesting, and it dovetails really nicely with my thoughts that if people have a creative way, they might not be able to talk about something, but they might be able to draw it or paint it or write a poem about it or sing a song about it,
Right.
as a way to help them recover from whatever situation they're going through.
Right, and you mentioned the recircuiting of your brain. I've heard there's a therapeutic method where they try to teach you to sort of like revision your history. Like if something's really troubling you, memory is really troubling you, they change the way you view that memory through the same sort of a similar process.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you're familiar with that. I thought was interesting because I totally agree that art, and especially what you say when you mention that sometimes you can put something in a picture or in a poem that is just not coming out of in language. When you're
Mm-hmm.
talking to somebody, when you're like doing talk therapy, maybe it isn't coming out as in a poem or in a painting or a piece of music. Those passions just come right out, and it's really powerful.
It's allowing the person to look at something through a different lens. It because there are different parts of your brain that respond to different things. So that
Right.
I think has been really helpful for a lot of clients, and hopefully will be more so in the future as the research is catching up with the idea.
Hmm. So it looks like, from what I've seen in your bio, you've published 3 chapbooks.
Uh,
Um,
two
so
chapbooks and
two
a full length.
chapbooks.
Yeah,
Okay, and one full length. Okay, so you have
yeah,
published a full length.
yeah, yeah.
I was just curious why you chose chapbooks. Do you find that medium is more constructive to what you're trying to express? I mean, what do you find the difference between a chapbook and a full collection?
Well, you can. It's a more brief look, I guess, at a particular topic. And a full length collection sometimes can have look at poems over time,
Hmm?
but the a quilted landscape actually is a theme of the local community here. So it depends on what you do with your book length material.
Did you find it more? Did you find it easier to write the chapbooks than the full length, or did the full length, was there like a editing process that was different for you for the different collections?
I think it certainly takes a little longer,
Yeah.
and by that I was able to get about a fourth of them published ahead of time in different journals and magazines. So that contributed to the I think the validity or the the combination of putting all that together in a collection.
Right. So why choose poetry, for you personally? Is that just the way your feelings presented themselves and your beliefs and your own perspective just wanted to be as a poem, or is there any other reason why you just chose poetry as an form of your expression?
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with I've been around poets for a long time. There are two colleges near me, one I worked at and another one about 35 miles away. And they often would share writers in residence, and so they would go to one college and they'd go to the other one. But for many, many years, there were writers coming here to Nebraska from all over the country. And so you could get to listen to different people and how they approach poetry. And so I just, have always thought about putting ideas together in the sense of poems rather than stories or novels. Seem like a much more challenging venue for me.
I think so for me too, as well. I'm do a little bit of short fiction, and I'm writing a novel now that's like it's tedious for me. Poetry just sometimes happens for me, and then the novel is like it's time consuming. It's a totally different discipline.
Yeah,
for me.
I've seen how people do work on novels, and it takes years and years and years to pull something together. So good for you.
Right, it's been a couple of years. I've been working on the same novel for 3 years now, and I'm maybe halfway done.
Yeah.
So it takes a little time. It's a much of a focus, kind of different focus. A poem can happen within a span of a few minutes, and then you work it out, and over maybe a week or two, and then you let it sit or whatever. It's just not as time consuming and as much effort to focus your energies towards, in my opinion. Did you find any particular poets that visited that they have an approach that appeals to you particularly?
I took a couple of retreats with Linda Hazelstrom. I don't know if you're familiar with her, but she's a South Dakota poet, and she's run a retreat center for over 25 years. But she writes from the perspective of a South Dakota rancher, and she's very in tune with the environment. And so I really like her work. Another one that I really like the work of is Twyla Hansen. She served as Nebraska State Poet for about 5 years. And she also is an environmentalist. I think her background is as a horticulturalist, but she has really stays in touch kind of with the natural world in her poetry. And so both of those women really influenced me.
So you don't have an MFA, I don't think. You didn't mention one. No. Do you find that may be a disadvantage in publishing and getting your work out there to not have an MFA in creative writing? Because those most of the big names in poetry in the circles you hear about, they're MFAs. I mean, it seems like you have to be sort of an academic to be in the circle, it seems.
Well, I think, it's really hard to break into big time journals and magazines because of that. Without that MFA behind my name, it really, I think, really makes a difference. So
right,
you know what you can do. It's like you send stuff out there, wish it best, and see what happens.
Definitely true. You never know what's gonna hit, what's gonna strike. I mean, I know a lot of the poets right now. I've talked with a lot of my friends who are really frustrated with the rejections and it's really tough. And the conversation I had yesterday with our novelist friend, she was in agreement. And like, how do we explain the process of going through the pains of writing and then throwing it out there and knowing that it's gonna stick to some people and we're gonna get rejected, be misunderstood? I mean. What do you think of that? How do you feel about the writer craft? I mean, and how much pains we go through. Why do we do that?
Good question. As some of the counseling I did in the past with the college students had kind of a career focus on it a little bit, and there was a career career counseling specialist that I heard speak one time, and he talked about how people should keep applying for jobs even when you're not getting much back, because if the more rejections you get means the more places that you are getting your resume out to, and so that should be a plus. That's a good thing. So that's what I try to take that perspective when I'm sending poems out. Okay, the more I get out there and get in now the electronic airways, the more likely something is going to pop.
Right. So why did you choose Finishing Line Press? Were they just one of the first that struck with your poetry, or was there a reason you ran into them?
Well, they were the first ones that offered me a publishing deal. So
Right.
I thought, well, all right, let's go. Let's do that.
Did they find you in a journal, or did they come to you, or did you go to them?
I submitted to their one of their contests.
And so they found you. Did you win the contest, or did they just
Well,
offer you?
unfortunately, I didn't win the contest, but I did get a contract. So it felt to me
Excellent.
like
So they liked it, obviously. They
yeah.
enjoyed it and they thought highly of it. That's great. I mean, it's always great to be appreciated, even if you don't win or get in the big structure, the tiers. The up in the top tiers. It's still nice that they recognized you and published your work. It's really
Oh
great.
yeah, and twice the second
Yeah, absolutely.
with them as well. So I really appreciate them.
So, and judging with Poetry Out Loud, did that teach you anything about the poetry community at large and your local poets?
Yeah, I was on a panel with other poets from the area, and we were able to have a really remarkable agreement on when we judged the poems. There was a rubric that we followed in terms of how does this student do compared to the various items on the rubric, and it was after you see a few of them, then you can really tell who's at the top level and who is not. I mean, I admire the students, going in and doing that. I think that's great high school project.
Right. It's excellent to reach out to the young people and find. I mean, when I was young, I didn't find any outlet for my poetry. I just wrote constantly and never knew there was a world out there where I could be submitting or looking for. We do writers in the schools here in Texas. That's a thing, and it's a lot of local poets are involved in that, and they come into the schools and they teach poetry and they talk to the students and they do a lot of slam teams and stuff.
Yeah.
So it's really nice that getting young people artistically involved. How do you feel about that as far as like how can that help a young person confront the world they're facing?
Well, I think we just look to the example of Amanda Gorman as someone who was able to, as a very young woman, just make a heck of a splash. I mean, I was so impressed with her at the inauguration. Just amazing young lady. And so she was able, I think, to take advantage of some of that growing up opportunity to work on her poems and have good mentorship and good teachers along the way.
Right. And we'll just take a minute to thank our teachers out there and thank our professional poets that are reaching out to the young communities and getting them involved. I mean, we need more writing. We need more people out there learning and approaching knowledge as a scholarship, and trying to get the world sort of constructed better. It's kind of falling apart on us right now. I don't know how you feel.
Well,
it's really tough.
When curriculums have to be revised, add more arts. Don't take them away. I mean, keep that. Don't take away recess either, because that's for an elementary age kid, having a physical outlet is really important, and that also fosters artistic thinking. If you have time to go play, then your brain has time to be creative.
Daydreaming is essential, I think, to the creative life. Just letting your mind, just kind of flow, just not really trying to focus on anything particular, just being playful in your thoughts. I've come up with a lot of ideas, just kind of bouncing ideas off each other and seeing what happens. It's like racquetball, the ball bouncing back and off the wall and everywhere else. You never know where it'll go. It's really a fun process, and I definitely love talking with other poets about how they do that. Do you find that do you feel like your poetry sometimes is inspired, or is it sometimes do you really just sit down and really contemplate what you're going to write?
A lot of times I'll get a line or an idea, and then I just sit down and see where it goes. And sometimes it's sort of where I thought it was going to go, and sometimes it ends up in a different spot.
Yeah, I think that's the case for me. Is it's sometimes a straight line, a title. It could be just a little piece of a poem that comes to mind, and then I start to write that, and the whole thing just floods out of me. I want to take a little time to appreciate Sheikh Musa Drame, who is one of our regular viewers. And just remember, everybody out there, you can comment, ask questions there on our Facebook. If you're watching right now, we'd love to hear from you. And we have Lynn here who would love to answer your questions, I'm sure. Why don't you share a couple of poems with us right now?
Okay, I'd love to. I'm going to start with one that kind of pulls my love of gardening and therapy together. It's called Garden Therapy.
Okay.
A recent study proves what I've known for years. Digging in the dirt treats depression as well as, or better than, Zoloft. There's nothing magic about bending, reaching, kneeling on soil that stretches us out of our bad backs, cures headaches, helps us forget troubles. Gardening is a break from social media, a fine way to chase away a day of frustration with government paperwork, website roadblocks. When my sheepdog Pickles drops a frisbee in front of me, it's time to stop and play for a while. Heal.
It's definitely true that I've read a lot about gardening in the dirt, and and how just being close to the earth and the soil is therapeutic in its own right. That was an interesting point to raise in that poem.
It seems to me like even touching soil with your bare hands as a way of it takes all the worries away. It somehow
The smells too. The smell of it is very refreshing.
The physical connection, I think, is important.
Excellent. So, do you have another poem you'd like to share with us?
Sure. Well, speaking, sort of in the natural world, I have one called, in my book, A Quilted Landscape, Reported Missing. Anthropoda, Lepidata, and Hymenoptera reported missing on the evening news. Asian beetles gone from soy fields. Crickets vanishing from garages. Monarchs declining without milkweeds. Honeybees essential for pollinating crops and gardens. Susceptible to chemical drift and endangered. Commissioners worry it's an outside job. Appoint a squad to search for kidnappers. Fret about foreign agents. Wait for ransom notes. Detectives assigned to investigate. Dig into the task like Danny on Bluebuds. Find spiders in the flower beds. Box elder bugs in barns. Hiding like nuclear fallout survivors. Prosecutors pursue the usual suspects. Find only winged carpenter ant queens dressed for Halloween, casing houses to infect. Commentators speculate about state of nature and agriculture, worry about the future's food supply and starving people. Legislators, terrified of losing big money gifts, bow to Bayer, Monsanto, Syngenta, fail to act again.
That's very interesting, and it kind of casts a lot of light on the problems we're facing as a civilization with our relationship with nature. I think that was one of the main points there, and how our politicians kind of sell out to the big corporations, and they don't really address the issues that we the people are kind of concerned with.
And it's a real, I think, closer to it here in this rural area where you see the effects of chemical drift. I have an organic garden, and right across the road is a soybean field that they spray from airplanes. And so I worry about chemical drift onto my organic garden quite a bit. I have a couple hives of bees, and they are very susceptible. I have a grape arbor, and it's very susceptible to chemical drift. So these are things that I worry about quite a bit.
Right. And I've heard there's a phrase I read about, I can't remember which magazine it was, and they call it the insect apocalypse, where insects were being leveled. I mean, we're just losing a lot of the basic ecosystem. How do you feel we can address that in poetry and in writing? I mean, other than, you're writing your poetry, is there a sort of way that we can cause people to feel empathic towards that sort of cause in poetry?
Well, I think if you get the unfortunately right now, I think other poets are the main audience for poetry.
Mm-hmm.
And somehow we need to get those people like Twyla Hanson's work, Linda Hazelham's work out to people. I I emulate them. I'm hardly in their league, but they are, they have important things to say about the environment and what we're doing to the environment. So if there's somehow that we can, and your broadcast is wonderful. I think this is great. It's another way to reach another audience.
Do you have any ideas on how to bring poetry to the contemporary world? I mean, it does seem like it's, as you say, poets reading other poets. It seems like we're preaching to the choir so much that, it's like talking to the saved already. We're already conscious there's something going on, and things are happening under our noses that it seems like most people are not being, wanting to address or not wanting to think about. And is there any ways you think we have any ideas on how to reach a broader audience for, the contemporary world for poetry or for writing in general?
I think the more we can get high school students and elementary students involved in poetry, then when they become adults, then they're already familiar with poetry as a way to say what you might not be able to say in a short story or an essay or a novel. So then, I think the more we do that, the more opportunities and likelihood is that as they become adults, they'll seek out poetry.
The one thing I was thinking is, as we need a small book of contemporary writing addressing concerns of today, rather than teaching, like say the romantics I mean, that's obviously something we do want to teach, but also alongside that, maybe having a supplemental, teaching from contemporary works, from people like some of the poets we've mentioned in the broadcast, and having them have students read a little bit of that. Maybe if they read about, say, gun violence in the neighborhoods, and they may relate strongly to that. I mean, we know a lot of high schoolers, during when I was growing up, loved Tupac, for instance, and that's because he addressed a lot of the contemporary issues that were going on in the world at the time, and I think that's a way we could definitely bring an audience to poetry. I mean, I think a lot of young people feel like the romantics are just kind of hokey pokey, or maybe they just aren't interested in that kind of concern, like in the from the past. But if we bring it to them, bring the contemporary world to them, and they recognize, and then you have personalities that are interesting behind the poetry, I think that's a good way to address it and get young people. I mean, we don't have how many people really admire the leading environmentalists, and the leading scientists. I mean, you just don't hear. I guess they're not really in the public spotlight that much. You see all kinds of pop culture icons, and really, we're kind of living in a sort of shallow age, I think.
And whatever the latest issue is in the news often takes precedent over anything else.
They have a lot of power. I really think that it's unfortunate that just throwing out, they just throw out a story and everyone's talking about it. Next minute, it's something else. It's like we're easily distracted by that. I try to tune out of a lot of that stuff. I mean, you want to stay informed, but you don't want to get it so wrapped up in that, because it's like it's not real life in a lot of ways.
Yep, I quite agree with that. It allows people to become distracted from larger issues, I think, when they're following the latest news announcement of the day.
All right. Just take a minute to thank Dee Dee Champagne for watching the show. She's been an excellent viewer and keeping in touch with us. Please leave your comments, guys. Leave some questions for us. We want to talk a little bit about, what your concerns are out there in the watching the show. I have this wonderful book, The Literary Parrot, which just put out $18 on Amazon. So I just wanted to throw in a little commercial announcement for that. This is 249 pages of literature, globally oriented literature, and I've got a lot of positive feedback on this. I just had a friend call me and tell me that this book, that she felt that it flowed really well, that it addressed a lot of issues going on in the world, that it was really nice, and she was planning to read it from front to back. So that's the Literary Parrot Series 1. Series 2 will be out in December. Keep an eye out for that. So I'm curious, like, how can poetry assuage people? I mean, we talk about how it could address troubles and concerns, but how can it actually comfort people in a troubled time such as this?
Well, I think it kind of works like therapy in a lot of ways, because you can look to a poem and see in it something maybe that the next person doesn't, that fits your situation. And I don't know, I just think that that's an answer for a lot of people, because you can look at different poets, take on the same kind of thing and see that, oh yeah, there is more than one way to see this.
Do you think poetry can share multiple perspectives? Like, something I like to do in my work is use ambiguity a lot, where you're kind of looking at something and you can see it from multiple angles.
Yeah.
Certain words are just loaded with meaning, and I think that really gives it the capacity, as you say, to multiple viewpoints. Do you like to try to experiment with that in your own work?
Yes, I do. Sometimes I find that I'm kind of like a storyteller, but in a poem. But I also kind of have been working on some poems that are a little different and that give more that ambiguous look at things.
You ever wondered if maybe that confuses people, or does it bring more light to them? You ever get comments back on your work from people that read it and tell you that they like it, don't like it, they found something in it they didn't think about before?
Actually, I'd love to hear more comments. It helps when you get feedback to know, what needs to be fixed, what worked. So sometimes people look at them and go, oh, these are, a comment that I heard as a counselor from students sometimes is, well, I could do what you do. I mean, how hard can it be, right? You just sit there and talk to people. And if you are writing something and someone looks at it and goes, well, how hard can that be? Anybody could do this. Is that a compliment or is that a criticism? So those are,
good question.
Decide how you want to take something like that.
Yeah, I think it can show, and in some ways, it's like they're saying, well, if anybody can do it, then why doesn't anybody do it? If anybody can write a poem, then why doesn't everybody write a poem? I mean, they say that about a lot of things. It's like if they see somebody really making a lot of money off of something, and they're like, I could have done that. Well, then why didn't you do it?
Yeah.
It's not really that easy. It's not. Some people make it look easy, So I would definitely encourage right now anybody that is listening into the program to leave some comments about the poetry we were discussing. Any concerns, any thoughts, feel free to share them with us. Thanks to Robert Masterson for viewing. It's wonderful to have interactive sessions with poets. So I think if you want, you can read us one more poem.
Okay. I'm going to read one called Look to This Day.
Okay.
And that title is from a Sanskrit poem from the 4th or 5th century from a poet by the name of Cladicea. Look to this day for surprises, to recall last night's affair, anticipate tomorrow's kiss. This day is hot, bright, sunny, but let's not complain or hurry September's romance as it slides too easily past October's cooling second thoughts, straight into Thanksgiving's talk of winter. Look to this day to avoid inevitable looking-glass reflections of love's lost, or the value of open windows after your God closes the front door.
Excellent. So what can you share a little bit about how you were inspired to write that?
I was reading this Sanskrit poem, and the title just said, "Oh, okay, I got to write something based off of that." And it just hit me as I was looking at it that, oh, this, I don't know, it just spoke to me in a way, and so I didn't have a idea where that was going to go. I
Right.
just thought, well, here it is, the end of summer, and so I went with that idea.
Excellent. So we have a remaining about 4 or 5 minutes. What are your last thoughts that you'd like to share with the audience?
I encourage everybody to read poetry as a way to, open and maybe open different vistas to see the world and to see different perspectives, and also find out how many wonderful writers there are in the world. I'm part of a writing group called the Northern Lights Writing Group of poets around this area, and we regularly meet and critique each other's work. And I learned so much from them. I can just imagine that if I was doing more of that, and getting other people's perspectives, it would be even more helpful. So I'm signed up for an online writing group in addition to that. So that also will provide some other ways of looking things. And so the more people can read poetry, I think the better for all of us.
I agree. I think it ennoble. I would like to use the phrase ennobles the mind in a lot of ways. It ennobles us and it improves our nature in so many ways. So would you like to maybe thank a few people, friends, family, fans, people who have encouraged you and supported you over the years?
Oh yeah, my children are certainly wonderful supporters. The writing group, Barbara, Neil, Karen, Bonnie, these are all terrific writers here locally. The two people I mentioned earlier, Twyla and Linda Hasestrom, have been terrifically supportive people. And just the opportunity that the colleges provide to bring writers here. So that has been really great, because people don't necessarily wander through Northeast Nebraska just by accident. I appreciate everybody's efforts to bring poets and poetry to this area. And then we have an opportunity to go and listen to each other and
Excellent.
Hear different people's take on the world.
Right. Well, thank you for joining us today, Lynn. If you haven't, did you want to say something else?
Oh, I wanted to thank you, because this is a great opportunity. Thank you for speaking with me.
Excellent. So it's been a wonderful talk with you today, Lynn, and I think we've learned quite a bit of interesting stuff about Nebraska and about poetry and about the arts and what they can do for us. And speaking of the arts, again, we have the Literary Parrot Series 1 available on Amazon for $18. I'd love for people to have a copy. This was a lot of work in this book. Excellent writers, excellent prose writers, poets, some visual art. And if you're curious about what's in this, we had several programs last week to promote this book, and we had several readings from the book. So take a look at our YouTube site and our YouTube channel, and definitely, give a look to the various programs we did on this book. It's wonderful. It's $18, 249 pages of contemporary work from global poets and writers all over. So we did not spare any countries. We scoured the earth, as I say. People that have been on guests on this program, and we're going to have, Series 2 is going to be in December 1st. We're going to release Series 2 of this book. It'll be from guests that will be on the program in the last few months, starting in July until the next, until December, until the next quarter. Through the next quarter, we're going to have this book. So definitely keep an eye out for that, and we'll be in touch with our poets and writers that we've had on there. And thank you, Dee Dee. Thank you so much for buying a copy of the book and watching the program. I hope you, and I'm glad you enjoy what we're doing, and just keep spreading the word, guys, out there to all of the world. We're trying to get as many subscribers as possible to our channel. I believe we're at like 280 or 270 now. We're looking for 1 million. 1 million. So keep it up out there. Keep our street team working and getting people to subscribe. We really appreciate it. Thank you, Lynn, for joining us today. This has been the Literary Corner, New York Parrot. I'm Dustin Pickering, signing off, and have a wonderful afternoon.
Parrot TV, the voice for humanity.